Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading Tirzah, and I want to review a little bit before we get started. First of all, Tirzah is a girl, a Hebrew girl, living during the time of Moses. And her mother and father are Jerahiel and Leah, and her brothers are Ram and Oren, and their uncle is Caleb, and their mother is pregnant. And they are preparing to leave Egypt with Moses. The Egyptians have already endured some of the plagues, but some of the plagues have not happened yet, and they are preparing for it. They are going to kill the lamb, and the lamb's blood is going to be put over the door, and that way they will avoid the curse, the plague, of the firstborn son being killed. And so we begin. Darkness over Egypt. It was morning, and Tirzah yawned sleepily as she stepped from the house. Instantly, she was wide awake. From sky to ground, it looked as if the world had split in two. Like a black wall, thick darkness blotted out the whole of the west where the rest of Egypt should have been. Tirzah stared, wondering how above her and all of Goshen the sun still shone in the sky. She ran to join her mother and the other women who stood in a small group. It is as Aaron said. Now Aaron, if you'll recall, is Moses' brother. We have light and they have darkness. Her mother spoke in a voice full of awe. May it make the Pharaoh believe and let our people go. The threatening blackness hung in the distance like a dark curtain. Tirzah had seen the yearly dust-filled Khamsin wind, but none like this. Surely even Pharaoh would change his mind now. Ram had come to stand by her. At 15, he was head and shoulders taller than Tirzah. For once, he was astonished. No one can work in that, he muttered. Aaron told us so yesterday, Tirzah said smugly. Ram didn't answer. Admit you were wrong, she coaxed, but Ram shrugged his shoulders and left. Under her breath, she muttered, brother donkey. The blackness over Egypt was proof of Moses' words. How she wished she could see behind it. Hidden by the darkness, the palace of Pharaoh crawled with servants, inspecting and filling the lamps that sat and hung everywhere. Windows that should have been streaming with sunlight were as black as night. Slaves hurried to bring more lights for the royal family's apartment. Aye, the wrath of Seth is upon us, an old woman cried as she hobbled with her load of fresh linens down the dim hall to her mistress's rooms. In the courtyard, guards cursed and servants grumbled in the confusion as they carried out their duties by the light of torches. Outside the lamps and torchlight, thick darkness lay in every corner, every window, every hall. It was an unnatural storm, a fearful one. Those on guard duty huddled above their small circle of windows, glad for each other's company. Every sound in the surrounding dark made the strongest of them listen nervously. Tatmes, master bricklayer, quickly heaved the door of the house shut upon the darkness outside. I have never seen a storm like this. You can feel the darkness. It is as if the earth has swallowed up the land. He flung the heavy whip from his hand into a corner, where it lay half coiled like a black snake. Loosening the belt on his tunic, he slipped out of his sandals. From her cushions, his young wife raised her dark eyes to his. What will become of us, my husband? In her arms, their firstborn son opened his eyes, and she rocked him gently. Nothing will happen if Pharaoh will let the Hebrew slaves go to worship their God. Tatmes sat and reached for the baby. The land won't take any more. The crops are in ruins. Our cattle are sick. He jiggled his infant son on his lap. Hey, little one, the gods are at war. A man cannot fight these things. This time surely Pharaoh will let them go. And good riddance to them, I say. He smiled at the baby, touching its tiny nose with his calloused forefinger. a nose already so like his own. Back in the palace, in a softly lit room, filled with the best furnishings to be found in Egypt, Pharaoh listened to his oldest son. Father, will you let them go this time? The nobles are worried because they have lost so much grain and cattle. The boy, a picture of his father, frowned. I think, Father, that this Hebrew God will not let Egypt alone until his people are allowed to go to the desert and sacrifice to him. Pharaoh frowned. Those who complain speak of losses. It is I who suffer when Egypt suffers. Angrily, Pharaoh struck his fist against his palm. Shall the gods of Egypt be mocked by this unknown God? The finely drawn black brows on his son's face rose questioningly. Why do the gods of Egypt allow this unknown God to torment us, Father? For a moment, the Pharaoh was silent. Perhaps they test us. I do not know, son. I have ordered the priests of Seth to sacrifice 3 times the amount requested. Pharaoh's eyes grew cold, his mouth grim. In the end, I will prevail. I will let these slaves go into the desert to worship their God, but they shall leave their flocks and their herds here. We shall see how willing they are to go then. Before him, a slave knelt to fasten the royal sandals, and Pharaoh grunted approval of the new design worked in gold across the center strap. Dismissing the slave, he stood up, the royal robe falling in perfect pleats about his tall, lean figure. You there, the royal finger pointed to one of the Nubian slaves. Take lamps and see that my house is as bright as the day at once. Turning to his son, Pharaoh's face softened as he took the boy's hand. Come, let us find your mother. We will make our own light, eh? In Goshen, the daylight continued. Tirzah, sitting on the ground with an unfinished basket on her lap, glanced at the dark to the west. There was no sign of change. As she reached for another reed, 2 soft hands covered her eyes from behind. An unmistakable voice said, Guess who? Laughing, Abihail flung herself down beside Tirzah. Isn't that something? She said, picking up Tirzah's basket. The darkness, I mean. At least the Egyptian potter hasn't come around lately. His beady eyes make me shiver. Skillfully, she held a new reed as Tirzah attached it to the basket. Mother makes me hide whenever he comes here. Ugh, I hope he falls into a well in that dark. That fat man with the pointed nose? Tirzah asked. Abihail nodded, her shining eyes blue as lapis stone. Tirzah pictured the man with just his nose sticking above the water, and she smiled. Remember when we used to pretend we were Egyptian noblewomen? She asked. Yes, and you even made a little stone god for us to dance before. Abihail bit her lip. I'm glad no one saw us. Tirzah's heart skipped a beat. Yahweh must have seen. But it was so long ago. They had been foolish children then. Not for anything in the world would I be an Egyptian now, even if they do own everything. Abihail threw her arms wide. Can you believe we are really going? No more Egypt, she cried, jumping to her feet. Clapping her hands, she twirled in an ancient dance of joy. Slapping the half-made basket against her palm, Tirzah joined in as Abihail whirled. Enough, Abihail laughed, stopping to get her breath. Anyway, I have to get back. Zeruiah is probably calling everywhere for me. Elder sisters are tyrants. You are so lucky not to have one. She squeezed Tirzah's shoulder lightly and was off. Her long red hair bounced against her back as she ran. Tirzah pushed a strand of her own black hair away from her face. Abihail was beautiful. She was better than the sister Tirzah had never seen. A slight noise from behind made her turn. Oren stood leaning on his crutch, looking in the direction Abihail had gone. When his eyes met Tirzah's, she was surprised to see a pink flush spreading over his face. As she looked at him, he lowered his eyes and bent to inspect a sandal strap. "Well, what is it?" she asked, her swift fingers putting another reed in place. "Have you left Ram with the goats?" "Yes, and you are to come and help with the packing." He waited while she gathered her reeds for the new basket. Together they walked through the harvested fields back to the village. Piles of hides, baskets, tents, and rugs lay everywhere. Small children ran and tumbled between and over the bundles. Tirzah could feel the excitement in the air. It was all so new. The whole of Goshen was getting ready to leave, and no one who wanted to come would be left behind. The village street was crowded. She pulled Oren flat against a dried mud wall out of the way of an old man leading a fat reddish-brown donkey. Though Pharaoh had refused to let the Hebrew people go, they were filtering into Goshen from all over Egypt. Some came by night, others by day, in spite of the watchful eyes of the Egyptian police. Tirzah hadn't dreamed that there were so many of her people. Every house had guests, including theirs. Under a palm in the courtyard, her mother sorted piles of household goods. Next to her sat the young woman who had come to stay with them. Tirzah shaded her eyes to look, but the woman's twin boys were nowhere in sight. They will be helping Ram, she thought. She pictured the three of them, Ram, broad-shouldered, straight black hair, square jaw, and the twins, curly-headed like two black sheep, their identical faces thin and dark from the sun. She grinned. Like her, the twins were 12. Oh, what delicious tricks she would play on Ram if she were a twin. The woman, Jeroth, was talking to her mother as Tirzah sat down next to them. "It is a fearsome thing to see what has happened to Egypt." Her voice was soft, but her slender hands flew as she talked. "Such thin cattle I never saw, bony and mangy. The Egyptians are terrified. They would not come near us as we fled Thebes." Her quick fingers paused for a moment. "Some of the women screamed at us to leave Egypt quickly. It was terrible. Only the Pharaoh and his Medjay are hardened against our going. But not even they can keep us now." Her mother reached a soft hand to Jeroth's brown one. "My dear, I want you to know you are welcome here. I don't know what I would have done without you, but may I be forgiven. I never thought to see these things happen in my lifetime." Jeroth looked up, a smile lighting her eyes. "Yes, I know what you mean. My husband, Molid, would repeat the words of the prophecy his father said to him and his grandfather before he died." Lifting her head, she recited the ancient saying of Joseph, "Yahweh will surely take care of you, and you will carry my bones up from here." Jeroth looked thoughtful for a moment. "Still, it seems like a dream, doesn't it? Moses has said that long ago in the time of Abraham, Yahweh foretold that his people would come up from Egypt after 400 years. Think of it, Leah. This very year is the 400th year since our people first came to Egypt." From the crowded street, a voice called a greeting. Tirzah turned to look at her mother, waved briefly. "That one," her mother said, "is my brother Shobal." Tirzah waved and smiled at the short, stout man, her uncle Shobal, hurrying past them. Once he'd given her a necklace with a worked stone. Poor Uncle Shobal. He was not well loved at her house. He and her father never agreed on anything. Her mother shook her head. From the time he opened his eyes, our Shobal was trouble. Since the day Moses arrived, Shobal argues and argues, demanding proofs from Moses, even blaming him for Pharaoh's cruelties. "Will he go with us when the time comes to leave?" Jeroth asked. Brushing an ant from Tirzah's lap, Tirzah smiled her thanks. "That one? He will go with us because to stay behind is too risky. Shobal is a practical man," her mother answered, sitting back on her heels. Good, Tirzah thought, because that meant Shobal's family would travel with them, and that man Abishur would come. He was handsome, gentle, 15, and not at all like his father Shobal. Among the eligible men, Abihail preferred him above all the other possible future husbands she and Tirzah could imagine. "Come," her mother said, rising. "Time to pack the tent." Tirzah was on her feet instantly. The new goatskin tent would be their desert home. To the west, the darkness hung thick and heavy over the land as she followed her mother into the house. 3 days later, the darkness lifted, and Pharaoh summoned Moses. On his throne, Pharaoh sat splendidly arrayed in the finest of linen embroidered with gold. On his forehead, a golden serpent with a jeweled eye flashed as he inclined his head. Before the court stood 2 men, one tall with a full white beard, his skin and clothing that of a Bedouin. Pharaoh briefly glanced at the other, a lean, gray-bearded man. It was the tall man with the piercing eyes, the one called Moses, that drew him like a magnet. The man's eyes seemed to burn in his sun-darkened face, and Pharaoh turned away slightly, in spite of his will to outstare this one. Breathed deeply, Pharaoh let the hatred of this man fill him with every muscle was taut. When he spoke, his words were hard as iron. "Go worship your God. Your women and children may go with you, but your flocks and herds will stay here." Behind him, the royal scribe murmured a soft sound of approval. A small, proud smile turned the corners of Pharaoh's mouth upward as he watched the men before him, disappointment clear on their faces. He waited for Moses to give his answer. Bowing low, Aaron stepped forward. "May Pharaoh live long, but you must allow us to have sacrifices and offerings to the Lord our God. Our livestock must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We do not know until we get there what we must use in our worship of Yahweh." Pharaoh was on his feet instantly. "Do you think I am a fool? I will hear no more of this. None of you shall leave Egypt." Pharaoh raised his arm, his hand a tight fist. "Get out of my sight," he shouted, "and do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." Turning his royal back, he moved toward the curtained doorway, signaling the court was over. Before anyone could follow, the voice of Moses rang out, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight, I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the slave girl who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well." No one moved or spoke as Moses continued. "From all over Egypt there will go up a great cry, the like of which has never been heard before, nor ever will be again. But throughout all Israel no sound will be heard from man or beast, not even a dog's bark." Moses turned his eyes upon the group of nobles standing in stunned amazement. He raised his rod toward them. "All these officials of yours will come down to me, bow down before me, and cry, 'Go away, you and all the people who follow at your heels. When the time comes, I shall go.'" His face burning with anger, Moses turned his back to the court and with Aaron strode swiftly from the palace. Outside, the sky was clear, the warm golden sun shining once more. Moses walked on in silence. Aaron glanced behind them. No one had followed them. When at last Moses spoke, it was to Aaron's surprise. "You must tell the leaders of every clan that they are to see that men and women alike ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold to take with them. Yahweh wills it." Puzzled, Aaron looked at Moses, but before he could ask anything, the sound of running feet made them both turn to look back. An Egyptian servant, one belonging to an upper-class family, from the looks of his clothes, hurried toward them and bowed low. "My lords, I am sent by the household of noble Sesostris to bring you this small gift." The man held out a box of carved wood and opened the lid for them. Inside the box were 4 gold ibises, each tiny bird perfect. Aaron took the box in his large hands. "You must thank your master for us," Moses said. As they went on, Moses murmured softly, "What do you think, Aaron? Could these gold ibises be the wages of some Hebrew slave for a lifetime of slavery?" "As you say, Moses, it may be that Yahweh will see to it that the Egyptians pay their laborers indeed," Aaron said. As he hurried to match his brother's stride, once again Moses grew silent, and Aaron made no more comments. After a while, Moses began to talk, his face grim. "Aaron, we must remind the people, none are to set foot outside their house this night until the signal to march is given. You will slay the lamb for our house, brother." Aaron nodded. All was ready. Without slowing his pace, Moses gripped Aaron's arm. Not one thing must be forgotten. His voice was tense as he repeated the instructions. "Everything must be done exactly as Yahweh has said. This will be a night Israel shall never forget, and one the Pharaoh will rue for the rest of his days." Once more, Moses fell silent. Aaron, too, was quiet. The night ahead of them would be unlike any other. And the 3rd chapter is called Go and Do Not Return. Well, that was certainly an interesting chapter, how it went back and forth between the slaves in Goshen and the Pharaoh. And you could see the difference. In Goshen, it was bright and sunny, and they're packing up to leave. And in Egypt, where the Pharaoh was, it was very, very dark, frighteningly dark. And then the Pharaoh confronted Moses and told him he could leave, but he had to leave his herd. Well, they have to have the herd. That's where they get their food, not to mention their sacrifices. So Moses and Aaron have now gone off to prepare for the final plague and then their departure. Bye-bye.